What's up, guys and gals? Welcome back to the Nerd Castle. Today we're checking out a little game called A Case of Distrust, which is a super stylized game that's been winning all kinds of indie awards all over the place. I figured we'd give it a go here today to see what the game's got going on. I have no idea what it is, but I can tell you the screenshots are pretty, and it's got a lot of awards, so why not? Let's check the damn thing out, shall we? Let's rock this thing. Okay, dancing dots. I like dipping dots, but I woke in my desk chair. Across from me were his piercing amber eyes. They surprised me at first, but I should have known he'd be there. I stretched and said mid-yawn, "It's not very nice to sneak into a sleeping woman's apartment," but that stare just continued. I laughed at his glare. I'd seen San Francisco's shrewd thugs, hardened cops, and deadly politicians, but none could ever match that gaze. I knew I didn't have what he wanted. Reaching into my coat, I took out my knife and I flicked it open. Hold it steady. I held the knife steady while staring back at him. "Look," I said, nodding towards the desk. "That's all there is. Take it or leave it. But a detective knows when she's beat. And I knew then." He wanted to search the place, and that's what he was going to do. I sighed, knowing my weakness for his type. "All right," I said. "Let's look." He let out a gleeful meow in victory. I cut a piece of my apple that the cat had rejected. Always a sore winner, I jabbed, but I was smiling too because I was telling the truth. There was absolutely no other food in my apartment. The cat often dropped by to scavenge. Made a lot of noise when he thought I was holding out on him, but right now the place was clean empty. No food anywhere, and I had to prove it to him. "All right, look, there's a bird. I kept a small statue beneath the side table. It had been police evidence in a crime, and its owner hadn't wanted it back. I took a shine to it, so I snagged it for myself on the way out of the department. The lamp had belonged to my Uncle Lewis. He'd been an SFPD officer, one who'd argued police women could be good detectives even while the others jeered at me. I knew he'd been right, but my current workload didn't help the claim. I thought about Lewis more often than I wanted. I was lousy at handling the emotions behind these thoughts. So apparently it's going to be one of those games. It looks like we've got notes over here because we're going to be doing investigations or something of the kind. Do you like this stylized art? Good lord, man. This is one of those games that comes at you full force with sort of that noir feeling. Packaged cigarettes were the latest trend, but I still prefer to roll my own. A woman after my own heart. She likes them Rolos, huh? The ashtray was evidence that it was a practiced skill. Suppose I had a lot of free time back then. The cat had waltzed into my apartment a few years earlier, kept coming back, though there was rarely anything to eat. He continued his loud meowing till I proved to him the place was empty of food. My old notebook, now filled to the brim. I wrote everything down, even minor details. Never know what can be useful. First half had my old cases, details from the beats I used to walk my policewoman days. Of course, policewomen were forbidden from going on patrol, but Lewis overlooked that rule. Let's see here. The newspaper was flopped on the floor. The headline about the death of Lenin, leader of the Red Menace sweeping Russia. Seemed the Bolsheviks had lost their head. Literally and figuratively. All right, kitty. I don't think there's anything left in here. "It doesn't matter how doe-eyed you are, cutie pie. I ain't got no food around," I told him. He licked his chops and looked at me. Apparently, he didn't still believe that. I needed to contradict him somehow, to show him something in the apartment that would prove it was empty of food. All right. So show the cat there's no food. The cat would continue his incessant meowing until I proved there was nothing here. I had to talk to him and then contradict him by pointing to a piece of evidence in my book. "So you won't stop until I can show you there's no food?" I asked him. He let out a loud meow in response. "All right, then," I sighed. I had to show him that where I kept the food was completely empty. I went back to the apartment to search for clues that I could show to him. Okay, so a little bit of investigation going on. Some food back here. Regular white icebox, tinged yellow with age, half blocked the kitchen doorway. My income rarely kept much stocked in it, and right now, it was empty. There, now I have the info. So let's prove to the cat we don't have any food. Alright, so I'm going to contradict you. And look, there's no evidence. Look, right now, I will show you the icebox. Regular white icebox, tinged yellow with age, half blocked. I opened the icebox so the cat could see inside. Empty, I told him. The cat looked quizzically at the open door, then back at me. Sorry, fella, no grub in there for me either. He stared at me with eyes, disappointed as I felt. Big yellows always got into my soul. Thoughts of my family filled my head. My parents were still in Chicago, where they'd moved our family in my final year of schooling. I'd returned to California, but they maintained that there were better job prospects for my father in Chicago. His alcoholism had cost him his job and nearly his life. He'd attempted a clean start many times, but even the Volstead Act couldn't make him pry open the grip that gin had on him. My mother stuck by him, whether for her godliness or her stubbornness I never really knew. I always thought her berating only chased him to the speakeasies, but it was the only way she'd known to love him. Most of their money came from my late grandmother's trust, but those funds were barely a trickle. I often dreamed of saving enough to help him. My mind spiraled into the usual series of questions. Had I even impacted the women's movement? Had I made any change on society at all? Was my plotting career worth losing traditional happiness? What was the point in the life I had chosen? Yeah, you get into them existential questions now that hit you right about the time you turn like 30. You be hitting those questions like, damn, in the middle of the night staring at the ceiling with your heart pounding. I know that feeling. A loud meow from the cat snapped my thoughts back into the moment. I took a deep breath and grinned back at him. I guess you can scram now, I said. Nobody's going to come knocking with food for you. Bye-bye, kitty. The door. The doorway was regrettably familiar face of Connor Green. I looked past him, peering left and right into the hallway. Heard a woman's heels marching down the carpeted stairs, but otherwise the building was silent, empty. Evidently, Green had come alone. He stared at me through the doorway with a coy smile. Well, ain't you gonna let me in? I let him in. I let him through the door before closing it. Hey, now, he said, looking at my apartment. You know, this clutter might turn off some customers. Not me, though. So that was his angle, hiring me as a detective. I wonder what a bootlegger would need with a private eye, but he answered without my prompt. I'm gonna make this quick. I can't take this to the hog house or the pigs will laugh me out, and other dicks just aren't as tempting. Dude, you gotta be careful with that phrasing. His grin widened. Thought this was gonna be quick, I said as I rolled a cigarette. It wasn't quick, and I'd already rolled and lit a second smoke when Green finally finished the story. I noted the important bits in the book. It had started with a letter slipped under his door in a white envelope. The envelope contained a single typewritten leaf, which he handed to me. It read, End your game, or we'll end you. Had no signature, instead ending with only a small scribble in the bottom right corner that resembled a black hand. Green had led on a new rum-running scheme, connection from Vancouver. Given a sample to Tiny Paul, the gangster who ran the Tin Spoon Speakeasy for mob boss Jerry Ferry, they'd agreed to buy in for more. Green surmised the letter was about his rum running. He suspected Redstone Stable, another bootlegger, sent in the letter. He told me that Stable ran a barber shop during the day and gave me the address. Okay. Green needed to know who the threat was from. He'd get Paul's gang to deal with them and continue his scheme to get rich. If I go off snooping myself, he concluded, folks see I'm not trusting people. No trust leads to no customers. I need to play a low key, which is where you come in. I raised an eyebrow and stared at him through the cigarette smoke. Something in his yarn was still twisted. He must have noticed my reticence because he said, You know, I work closely with Lewis. I'm sure he want to protect me as much as any other victim. My uncle. Let's go with... Lewis had put me on the force to begin with. Made me the first policewoman for the SFPD. He was the only one who really let me walk the beats with him and do more crime scenes than comfort a widow. He'd been obsessed with helping victims and bringing justice to those beyond salvation. After he'd taken his own life, I'd quit the SFPD. There was little more I could do there. I started my own practice, taking his ethos to heart. Was Green worth my time? Would he be worth Lewis's? Green had tipped off my uncle in a few cases. I wondered if that was enough to warrant my protection. Before I could think past my headache, he threw a bill in my lap. Keep the C note as a retainer, and don't worry about getting in touch. I'll find you later for a chat. He walked out the front door and I let him go. If he was willing to give me $100 with no commitment, I didn't stop him. I turned back to the apartment, still confused about the whole story. Headache wasn't really helping either. When I lacked clarity, a trip to the Southern Coffee was usually the cure. I'd mounted a gold plate on the outside that read PC Malone, Private Investigator. All right, let's go to Southern Coffee. Southern Coffee was a basement dive. It wasn't modern, hip, or ever busy, and it was my favorite place to down some paint, especially in the company of the best bartender in the city. Man, this is real stylized. I like it. I don't know how much substance there is there, but damn, they put a lot into the writing. Is good, though, too. The writing feels solid. Like, it feels like whoever wrote it actually knows what they're doing when it comes to stringing a paragraph together. I stepped into the taxi and rocked into a comfortable position on the back seat. Thought about starting a chat with the driver. We talked about the weather and not much else. Sometimes taxicab drivers made poor conversation partners. Southern Coffee was an automat diner. Ethel Burgess, the lone waitress, was friendly to help with any inquiry. Of course, if you winked at her right, she'd show you the way to the downstairs toilet, where Frankie played bathroom attendant. Southern Coffee had the distinct feeling of home. The familiar smell of mold in that old basement was enough to put a grin on my face. All right, let's take up a stool here. Frankie tended bar at Southern Coffee. Though it wasn't his place, I never caught a whiff of the real owners. They trusted Frankie to do what he did best. I said, "Hello, Frankie," and was met with a smile and a grunt from Franklin Ernest Conway. He was a big fella, both wide and tall, must have been a little over 50. Had a round head, kind brown eyes, and a cropped ring of gray hair encircling an otherwise bald scalp. His voice had a warm timbre that complemented the tobacco and whiskey smells of the speakeasy. I sat at the bar. "You got the spooks, PC?" he asked. "You won as a catcher's mitt." I suppose my exhaustion showed. I won $100 for nothing, and I can't let it go. I told Frankie about the case, the threatening letter sent to Connor Green, how he assumed it was related to his bootlegging and his suspicion of Redstone Stable. Story took longer than I'd wanted, Frankie showing genuine interest by asking a lot of questions. When I finished, he threw me the whiskey sour he'd been stirring. I took a big gulp and gave a sigh as thanks. "Well, Green's case is better than most of what you're giving," he said with some enthusiasm. "At least it's not more of that adultery bunk." "Sure," I replied. "But I started with a goal in mind. What's the point in helping a man like Green?" Frankie clicked his tongue on his teeth. "Yeah, lawyer, priest, why does it matter? Let me ask you. All the clients you have now the types that you want to help?" I admitted they weren't. I told him that I'd wanted more from my detecting life. "Well, it could be that Green's case shoots your career forward, Malone." I sighed and stared down at my drink. But my daze was interrupted by the basement door opening, then slamming shut. A small, blustering woman began marching towards me. She was wearing a light blue cloche hat with a gray ribbon tilted back on her head. A scarf of similar blue draped around her neck, but I was startled by what she wore underneath it. A gray trench coat that looked too large for her frame. It was exactly like the one that had belonged to, Lewis. She hurled insults at me a while. All I could do was sit and take it until she ran out of gas and started breathing heavily. I set my drink on the bar and looked her in the eyes. I inserted a hello. "I'm Phyllis Malone. How can I help you?" accompanied by a smile as genuine as I could muster. That knocked her off balance. She stumbled over her next few words, and I added, "You are?" The flame returned to her eyes, and between clenched teeth she hissed, "I'm the wife of that bum who sneaks into your bed." "The cat?" But humor wasn't her angle. She launched into another poetic stanza. "And he just left your sty this morning," she finally ended. And that was when I gathered she was Connor Green's wife. "Mrs. Green, I'm a PI, not a homewrecker, and I don't think your husband in his line of business would want to bet a dick anyhow." Her look was pure incredulity. "A woman in that line of work?" she questioned. "I don't believe it." What I have going on right now. The day he came to me, Green had received a typewritten letter that said, "End your game or we'll end you." I told her about why Connor had come to me, the bootlegging and the threats. "You see, Miss Green, this is what I do. Not much more I can show you to prove it." It still took more coaxing for her to believe me, but eventually she came around. She seemed grateful that I had explained it. Apparently, she had seen her husband leave my apartment and distraught, she had followed me all the way to Frankie's basement and decided to confront me. I suppose I lost my head after what I thought I'd seen, she said. Began to cry. Frankie, ever chivalrous to a dimpled girl, came around the bar and held her up. That's all right, Miss Green. Why don't I hail you a cab and send you on back home? She agreed, and they walked together up the stairs. When Frankie returned, I said to him, "You turn night real quick." He snorted a laugh. Well, hell, we can't have that siren in here. With a torture yelling like that, every street bug would come to a rescue. Mrs. Green is a torch singer? Well, I learned she was Mrs. Connor Green just now, and when she came in here, I only seen her as Little Fanny, singing lead for the jazz band over at the Tin Spoon. The Tin Spoon, I said. Tiny Paul's joint? That's where Green's selling the liquor. Say, you think that's where she met her husband? I laughed. You're a real sleuth, Frankie. He made a sarcastic bow. I shook my head. You're telling me that you escorted our little torture out just to avoid a bit of hot water? Frankie flushed and said, What are you talking about, Miss Malone? I was never good with emotions, but it was plain that Frankie had to instantly fallen for the girl. So what if I had more questions to squeeze out of her, I asked. What more could you possibly want from Little Fanny? She can't have nothing to do with Green's mess. I don't know if I have any evidence. I don't know. She's following her husband. Miss Green followed her husband to my place, I said. Why would she do that? Frankie rolled his eyes. PC, if you was Green's wife, would you trust him with anything? I'm sure he's always up to something. I shrugged and stood up from the bar stool. All right. I grabbed the wine bottle on the bar and examined the label. It featured a picture of grapes and the words, sacramental use only. Frankie looked at me with a spark in his eye. Go ahead and give it a swig. I grabbed a half-empty glass that had been next to the bottle and swirled some of its contents between my gums. A bit spicy, ain't it? Frankie asked. A little too much. He scoffed and grabbed the bottle from me, turning it in his hands. I suppose you only like that bootleg paint. Well, I'll have you know that rabbits charge more than a nickel for this beauty. Only this type of Napa wine's made from that Zinfandel grape. Got that unique aroma. I've been trying to learn more about wine. Seemed everyone knew their stuff but me. I noted that Frankie had said about the origin of the grape as he sat the bottle back on the bar. So when do you know grapes? I chided. Frankie let out a belly laugh. Some of them grapes are older than you, Malone. I've known about them since I was a small tot. That's why I'm so good at my job now. Frankie sighed. Too bad more folks can't taste them. That woman's league's the devil. Women's Christian Temperance Union was now under feminist Frances Willard, positive force for the suffrage of women, but her staunch support of prohibition, along with the union's massive political clout, irked the very wet San Franciscan public, and she particularly wasn't popular with bartenders. I turned back to Frankie. I'm going to ask him about some of my notes. I wondered aloud how I could get more dirt on Green's bootlegging. Frankie thought about it too and offered, well, Green's working with Tiny Paul on this scheme, and if I were to buy from a new source, I'd have to try it and get a taster. I continued his thought. So there's likely a sample of Green's stuff laying around the Tin Spoon. That'd make sense. Maybe I can ask Paul about whatever booze I find in there. Frankie nodded, and I thanked him for the advice. I thought about what else I should ask. Okay. Let's ask about... I brought up Redstone Table. He's the man that Green pointed you towards, right? Frankie asked. It is possible he still knows something about this mess. I agreed. I thought about what else I could ask him. Let's see if there's anything else in here that looks pertinent. Mrs. Green's gray coat. I pointed to something in my book, but Frankie's response was nothing memorable. All right. Let's ask about her singing. Okay, never mind then. I don't think he's got much else for us. Let's walk away from dear old Frankie here in the liquor bottle and see what we can accomplish. I was heading up the stairs when Frankie called after me. What are you gonna do? I'd been thinking about my parents. Guilt stung me. My separation from them had been a choice. I'd hated Chicago and abandoned their lives. I thought that if I could help them financially, I might be able to abate those sins. I steeled myself. I guess I'll take Connor Green's bait, I replied. I got nothing better on the stove, and he might need the help. Something still stinks, though. Well, what's the plan, Frankie asked. The way I see it, I have 3 goals right now. Green hired me for a job. Find the guy who wrote the letter. That's the basic part. But you want more. I nodded. Green's a shady character. I need to learn about him. Who is this guy? Dig into his past. Can't go into him blind. And there's something about his bootlegging. How'd Green get a connection like that, and what's his source? Squeezing that lemon might give me some juice. Sounds all right, he replied. So where are you off to? I've got 3 leads. That bootlegger stable, who Green claims sent him the letter. The Tin Spoon Lounge, where I might learn more about Green's rum running schemes. And Mrs. Green, who could give me more dirt on her husband. Frankie nodded his approval. Well, if you ever stuck, come back and see me. We can solve anything without talking it over. Well, let's go to the Green's house. We're going to grill that lady first. Somebody with a grudge seems the most likely to snitch, so... Green's house might contain more clues about his past, or some reason a threatening letter would come his way. And if I got lucky, Mrs. Green would be there to pump with more questions. I gave my address and slouched in the back seat of the taxicab. I thought a good way to pass the journey might be to chat with the driver. Driver talked about baseball. You know, he started, my bet is that the Seals could play in the majors. His voice had a high pitch and was just nasally enough to be irritating. Between Shea, Geary, and McQueenie, we've got enough guys who would know how to hurl a ball. And our middle order of Warner, Walsh, and Montague is unstoppable. Sure, we need a better fielding, but there is no reason we can't snag a glove from out east. Hell, we could pay better than half those teams anyhow. Of course, those owners say their teams would mop the floor with us, but they're just scared of a competitive coast. Only want the profits to stay in their own cronies. I'm gonna tune out. I can't do that voice forever. That's a rough one. I don't do it very often. He droned about the Seals for what felt like an eternity. My eyes glazed over and I was nearly asleep when he said, "We're here." There you go. That's one of those voices I never practice. Never practice it. The Greens' apartment was a section of an old Western Addition mansion. The owners had divided it for struggling families to rent after the 1906 fire. Once downtown had been rebuilt, the people of means moved out of the area. Recent immigrants, mainly from Japan, rented most of the apartments in this part of town. And as we go inside, I'm going to end the episode right there. A Case of Mistrust. You can get it down below in the description if you want to get the game for yourself and explore it. I probably won't do more because I want to leave this open to anybody that wants to get the game, and this seems like this game that's going to have a lot of like spoilers and stuff like that. So if you liked it, that's where you will find it. My name is Splattercat. I show off indie games every single day on the internet for you, the fine folks of the Nerd Castle. If you like what I do, hit this video with a like. It's the best way to keep me in business and keep me a-chugging. And aside from that, I'll see y'all later. How you do, everybody?